So imagine you're walking down the street with Jesus. And you see a blind man on the side of the road. And you've got three options before you. Option one is you say nothing. Option two is you turn to Jesus and you say, maybe we ought to heal the guy. Or option three is you turn to Jesus in front of this blind guy and you say, why do you reckon he's blind? Is it his fault or his parents' fault? Which option do you actually choose? I mean, perhaps you would like to think you'd do B. You'd like to think, hey, I'd have enough faith to say, Jesus, would you like to do something about the blind guy? At very least, if you don't do that, maybe you do A. You'd walk by and think, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to say. Maybe I'll just say nothing. If Jesus wants to do something, maybe he'll do something about it. Or do you go for option three? Who's to blame? Is this guy or his parents? Like, clearly somebody's at fault for this guy being blind. Well, who would possibly go for option three? Jesus' disciples. That's exactly who goes for option three. And we're told this story in John chapter 9, and that's the story I want to look at tonight. We're told in John chapter 9, verse 2, it says, his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? And so what his disciples are asking is basically, this guy's blind, who's to blame? Who's at fault? Clearly somebody's got to be at fault, and we're looking to find that person and sort of out them or shame them, or we just want to know. We're a little curious. It's a fairly insensitive question when you think about it, because the guy's, he's blind, but he's not deaf. So he can actually hear what's going on. You ever been in a place like that where somebody's talking as if you're not there and you want to go, hello, I'm actually here. Well, that's what's going on here. They're walking up and they're saying, who's to blame? And this guy can hear that they're talking about them. And now part of the question comes from this notion, there was sort of this Jewish tradition, this Jewish belief at the time, that if somebody was suffering, if somebody was in pain, it was sort of a bit like a Jewish karma, I suppose, that clearly it must have been somebody's fault. They knew that sin ultimately came from the fall, the rebellion of humanity against God. But the disciples are actually taking it a little bit further. They're saying, not that why is there sin, why is there suffering in the world? There's not that big sort of question. They're actually getting really, really specific, and they're saying, look at this guy. What's this guy done, or what has his parents done? Who sinned? And sometimes we can ask questions like that. We see something going wrong, we see suffering, we see somebody in pain, and we're quick to figure out, what have they done? Whose fault is it? Who's to blame? When I would argue, perhaps the question the disciples should have been asking is, what can we do about it? Jesus, what can you do about it? Is there any way we can help this man? Is there any way we can alleviate his suffering? Is there any way we can help him in his pain? But it's not the question they ask. They ask the question of who's to blame, who's at fault in this particular situation. And so how does Jesus answer the question? I mean, Jesus could have answered it by saying, hey, let me explain theologically. Let me go right back to Genesis. Let me take you through this track. And he doesn't answer that way at all. Jesus answers this way. He says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus. But this happened so the works of God might be displayed in him. Hear what Jesus said? Forget about who's at fault. Watch what's going to happen here. This man's predicament was so that the works of God might be displayed, so my Father might be glorified through what goes on here. And as the story progresses, he will actually heal the man. And so superficially we read this story and it seems like, okay, this is another Jesus healing story. We've actually been looking at a lot of Jesus healing stories. And so what makes this one so special? I think what's really interesting is not just how Jesus heals this guy, not that Jesus is going to heal this guy, but how he heals this guy. And what is he actually doing in the choices that he makes? And what choices is he inviting us to make? Because after he said this, after he said, no, it's neither his parents or it's not him, and stop trying to play the blame game. Basically, what Jesus says, stop worrying about that. Just watch how God is going to be glorified, how my Father's works are going to be known through this. Just watch what happens. After he says that, then we're told this is what happened. After saying this, he spit on the ground, made some mud with saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. Did you get what Jesus just did? He spits on the ground and he makes some mud, and from that spit-laden mud, he smears it on the eyes of the guy. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. We read it, but it would take a lot of spit, right? And it wouldn't be like a little dainty, and you know, like, can you remember this guy's blind, but he can hear. And so what's he heard so far? Imagine the scene. You're this guy, you've been blind from birth. And we're told he's a man. So this has been decades that he's experienced this. He hears Jesus coming by. He's maybe heard about Jesus. He's Jesus' disciples say, who's to blame, this man or his parents? Jesus says, neither. Watch what's going to happen. And next thing he hears is Jesus hocking it up. Right? It's like, right? And there's like, he's got to get a lot of spit out. And there's something about spit. I mean, you've all got spit in your mouth right now. It doesn't seem to bother you. But the moment that spit leaves your mouth, it's something else, correct? And particularly if it's somebody else's spit. Nobody wants to touch that. And so here's this guy, and he hears this Jesus hocking this spit up. And then he can feel it getting put across his eyes. And it must feel like, this guy is mocking me. This guy is making fun of me. It almost seems like Jesus is putting this guy to even more ridicule and more shame than he's already experienced. And so you ever wonder why Jesus does it this way? You know, he doesn't even need the mud, does he? I mean, Jesus could just say, healed, he's healed. He could touch him. He could just say the word. He doesn't need the mud. He doesn't need to do anything. So why does he do it this way? Why does he hock it up, and then why does he make this mud and smear it over the guy's eyes? And scholars puzzle with this question. They wrestle with this question. And scholars have all sorts of ideas. Some say, oh, well, there's a Jewish tradition that says spit has healing powers, right? Others say, well, pagans believe that spit had magical powers and maybe Jesus was tapping that. Others say, no, you misunderstand the point. It wasn't human spit, it was God's spit. And it was like this special spit that Jesus was bringing up. Other scholars say, no, what was happening is this guy was born blind. And so what happened is remember when Adam was made out of dust and he was given his original birth, the birth of humanity, if you like, then Jesus is recreating and making this guy reborn, right? And so what he's doing is getting some spit and he's dirt, and he's getting the dirt and he's getting some spit, and he's sort of remaking this guy. I think later in the story, when we're told how the Pharisees react, I think we get a clue to what Jesus is actually doing here. Why? I mean, I think Jesus is, it's not like Jesus is going like, it's a slow day. I've done like feeding the 5,000. I've walked on water. I've done healing from a distance. I'm going to do something new. I don't think that's what was going on. I think he's doing this for a particular reason. Later on, and this whole chapter 9 is full of this story. It's 41 verses, and we're going to look at every one in detail. No, we're not. Okay, I'm just going to jump into different verses tonight. So in verses 14 to 16, when we jump ahead, Jesus the Pharisees are now talking about what has happened. And we're told now the day on which Jesus had made the mud and opened the man's eyes was a Sabbath. Therefore the Pharisees asked him how he had received his sight. This is the man that was born blind. And he says, he put mud in my eyes, the man replied, and I washed and I now see. Some of the Pharisees said, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. But others said, how can a sinner perform such signs? And so they were divided. And so I reckon this is good. I actually think Jesus is being deliberately provocative. There's something about when Jesus gets feisty that I really, really like. And I think he's stirring the pot. I think he knows how they're going to react at this point. The mud doesn't actually heal the guy. If you read the story, Jesus puts some mud on him. The guy has to go where he is sent, and when he gets to the pool, he washes the mud off. Then he sees. So it's like there's nothing magical about the mud. But it creates a tension for the Pharisees, the religious leaders. The religious leaders of the time, they have their ideas on how to live the devout life, how to live the life that pleases God. And they figure the way that you please God is they say, we've created all these little rules that you ought to live by. And if you can just live by all the rules that we live by, if you can live by the religious way that we live, if you can just do it like we do it, then you'll be right with God. That's how it works. And so they have these rules. They're not all, they start with the law of God, but they tend to go a lot further than God intended. So they're right about the Sabbath. God said in the creation account, He worked 6 days, and then on the 7th day there was rest. And so God instituted a day of Sabbath or a day of rest. And He said, what I want you to do is have a rest or a break on that 7th day. So when they see Jesus doing this on the Sabbath, they're right about Sabbath should have been a day of rest. But they've added a rule to it. They said, if we're meant to be resting on the Sabbath, that means we shouldn't heal on the Sabbath. That's one of our rules. Can't heal. No healing. Right? Another rule that we've got is you can't knead. Right? So you can't make dough or you can't make spit-laden mud. Right? On the Sabbath. That's kneading the mud, and that's considered work. And so they have all these Sabbath rules about what they think the right life is, the devout life, the life that pleases God is like. And Jesus comes along and He breaks the rules all the time. Never breaks the laws of God. But all the little rules that they've created. He says, I don't care. I'm not going to live by your rules. In fact, that's not the way. And in fact, in the Gospel, 7 times, in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, 7 times we're told that Jesus actually chooses to heal people on the Sabbath. I mean, He's got Sunday through to Friday He could have done it. Their Sabbath is a Saturday. Surely He could have done it any of those other days. I think He deliberately does it on the Sabbath just to provoke these guys. He's challenging their notion of what pleases God and how do we live the life that pleases God. And so He deliberately challenge them. He wants to show that God is not so bound up by these little rules that they're trying to create. And that God is far more interested in the care of people and the restoration of people than He is by keeping all the little rules that the Pharisees think make people righteous. And so when Jesus does this, He's actually forcing people to make a choice. He's saying, you know how the Pharisees think you're right with God? And they've got all their little rules and they've got this religious devotion, this devout life. Or you can live a life where you trust God and you engage in the heart of God and you follow God and you understand that the fundamental thing to following God is to love God and to love others. And so He says, when I get to a Sabbath and I see somebody in pain, how can I walk by? How is that consistent with God? And so He challenges their rules. And maybe that's what He's doing for you today. Maybe He's challenging your notions about God. Maybe you thought that God's just all about the rules. And we can know it, but sometimes we still feel it. We feel like, if I do something wrong, God's going to blow the whistle and He's going to get me. And yet when the disciples are there and they walk past a man that's been blind from birth and they want to ask the question of who's to blame, Jesus doesn't even enter into the conversation. He's saying, He's focused, how do I restore this man? How do I make this man right? How do I show this man that God cares for him? And He feels the same about us. And so when I know that about Jesus, then it makes it all the more difficult to understand why He would do this to this man. If He cares so much about this man, and He says, the heart of God is to love God and to love humanity, and don't let these little rules that the Pharisees are creating, don't let this religious devotion get in the way of wanting to love and care for people, then why does He do what He does to this man? Why does he choose to heal this man in what seems like such a humiliating way? Because we're told after saying this, he spit on the ground, he made some mud with the saliva, and he put it on the man's eyes. Go, he told him, wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. He spits, he makes the mud, he puts on the guy's eyes. He makes him walk. The blind man walked with spit-laden mud smeared across his eyes. And he makes him walk, fumble around, I guess, trying to find his way to the pool. I mean, how would you respond if you're this man? Isn't there part of you that it's not even clear how he's supposed to even get there? It's not like Jesus says, hey, can somebody in the crowd take this guy to the pool? That doesn't happen. He doesn't say one of the disciples. He doesn't even say hey, Bartholomew, you do nothing. There's nothing recorded about you in the scripture at all, but he's got your name. Here's your moment, Bart, right? Be the guy that There's not even that moment. There's just he just tells the blind guy to make his way to the pool called Siloam. And this man might have been forgiven for saying no. No. I've heard what you can do. I know you can just touch me. I know you can just say a word. I've heard the stories. You could say, why do you feel the need to humiliate me any further? Has not my life been full of humiliation? Every day I come here and beg. You could understand that he would say that. He could have taken a stand. Or, in humble anticipation of the fact that Jesus may be doing something for him, in him, and through him, he could have just walked to the place that Jesus told him to go. And with spit-laden mud on his face, he walked to the pool of Siloam, just as Jesus told him to go. And then John gives us a really interesting detail about the pool of Siloam. He says, this word means sent. It was both the name of the place and a metaphor for what was happening. This is about trust. This is about going where you're told by God. This is about obedience. All the blind man knows is what he's heard about Jesus, and all he knows is what Jesus has told him to do. Literally, seeing before believing is impossible for him. He can only trust Jesus on what he knows, and he barely knows anything. Just the stories he's heard and the instruction that he's been given. And sometimes that's all we've got to go on. You've got to make the choice. Do I stop waiting for the fact that I need more before I do what God tells me? I remember would have been 11, when the first time I heard about what Jesus had done for me. I didn't know much about church. I knew a little bit about God. And when I heard that story, I thought, that's enough. I'm in. I'll follow a God like that. And just like me as an 11-year-old, you don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to know it all. It doesn't have to answer every question. Sometimes it's just, what have I heard? What's he saying? Will I trust him on that? And that's exactly what this guy does. Just because this guy tells him, this guy that is hocked up into the dirt and made some mud and smeared it on his eyes, and because he's heard stories about this guy, and this guy says, walk to the pool of Siloam. He says, that's enough. And he goes to the place of sent. He goes to the place of trust. He goes to the place of obedience. And as he goes, it's not like his prayers have been answered yet. It's not like his life is any better yet. In fact, it must have been confusing as he started to move in the direction that Jesus told him, because it must seem like he was going further away from the one who could possibly have hope for him. He didn't really understand all that was going on. All he could do was trust in the goodness and the capacity of Jesus to do what he thought Jesus was going to do. And sometimes it's just, I don't get it, it's confusing, I feel like I'm moving further away from you than getting closer to you, but if this is what you want me to do, I will follow you and I'll trust you. And it's just that little bit, that's all we need. And so this man goes, and he goes to see what Jesus will do at the end of the journey for him. Erwin McManus, an author that I really like, in his book, I think it was Seize the Divine Moment, makes this observation. He says, the relationship between faith and uncertainty is inescapable. What required faith yesterday may become commonplace for you tomorrow. Although they are still expressions of your faith, they are no longer the challenges that launch you to a new faith experience. Whilst at first simply trusting God to take you outside your experience is a huge leap of faith, eventually God will expect more of you. Remember, faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. See, what he's saying is if you think there'll just come that time when you take that step with God and then every other step with God is easy, he's saying no. What happens is actually that first step that seems so huge will actually feel like commonplace. It'll feel normal to trust God. But then he'll take you to somewhere else. It requires even more of you to trust him. And he said, if you're looking for a faith where it doesn't feel like walking to the pool of Siloam, he says, that's not what's going to happen. He says, faith is full of that tension between faith and uncertainty. And that we'll always have these moments of walking the pool of Siloam. It's like, I heard his voice. I think I know what he said. It's a little confusing. I don't quite understand it. It feels like I'm moving further away from him. It doesn't make sense to me, but it's what he said. I will do it, and I'll give it a go. And that's the nature of faith. And there'll be those moments when you sense God pushing you in a particular direction, where it'll be confusing, like this guy, like it was for this guy. There'll be moments when you say, I don't really understand what you're doing, God. And all I can do, God, is I trust that you are good, and I trust that you're capable. And I'm just going to move in the direction. But the tension between faith and uncertainty is inescapable. There'll always be those questions. And yet there's the choice. Will I trust him or not? Will I trust Jesus or not? Now, remember how this story starts. This story starts with asking the question, who sinned? Who caused the blindness? And remember Jesus' answer? Neither this man nor his parents, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. So how is the work of God displayed in this man's life? Is this just a healing story? I mean, if it was, that would be enough. But I actually reckon there's something else going on here. Because if it was a healing story, shouldn't the story stop when the guy's healed? But that's not where this story stops at all. This story actually continues. It doesn't stop with the guy seeing. It doesn't stop with just a miracle. The story actually ends with this guy getting thrown out of the local synagogue by the religious leaders who don't like his answers and don't like his newfound faith in Jesus. They don't like how his life has been utterly changed by Jesus. And so what they do is they throw him out of the synagogue. And so what happens is word gets around that this guy is being healed. And so the Pharisees, the religious leaders, who are very invested in the status quo, who are very invested in what they think the devout life is, in the way that we ought to live if we want to be right before God. And they don't like Jesus sort of challenging their rules and challenging the way that they think things ought to work. They launch this investigation to try to figure out what was going on, because they don't know what to do with Jesus. He doesn't fit into the box. He doesn't actually play by the rules. God seems to be doing stuff through him and in him, but then he keeps breaking all the rules. He's not towing the line. What do we do with him? And so what they try to do is they actually try to discredit him. We're told in verses 18 and 19. They still did not believe that he had been blind. This is the man that had been cured. That he had been blind and had received his sight until they sent for the man's parents. Is he your son, they asked. Is this the one you say was born blind? How is it that now he can see? I reckon it's fascinating. You know what they do? They get the parents along and they say, look, we can see this guy. We can clearly see that he can see now. Are you sure he's yours? Right? Maybe he's like a doppelganger for your son. That's effectively what they're saying. Like, are you sure? Because we all know your son was blind. Maybe he just looks a lot like your son. And then when they say, no, he's our son, they go, well, are you sure he's like really blind? Maybe he's like mostly blind. Maybe he's blind some of the time, and some of the time he could see. That's effectively what they're asking. And when you think about it, it's bizarre, is it not? Because the Pharisees are faced with basically, I reckon, three choices when confronted with the situation, this particular situation. And there are three choices that every one of us is faced when we're confronted with the truth of what Jesus does and who he is. Right? And the three choices you can have. You can let the truth change you. And so they've got the truth that Jesus is healing people. Jesus is from God. And it means their notions of what makes them devout, the notions about the way in which they approach God, the nature of faith, they have to rethink all of that. One, they can let the truth change them. Second option is they can try to change the truth. Right? So how do they try to change the truth? Is he really your son? Or maybe he was like mostly blind, a little bit blind. It's only sometimes blind. So, because you've got to do something with this. So you either have to let the truth change you, or secondly, you have to try to change the truth or distort the truth. But there's also a third way in which people respond to things that they don't like, particularly truth they don't like, is they can try to change the truth and destroy the one or discredit the one who actually brings the truth. And so what happens in this story? At first they go to his parents, say, are you sure he's your son? Are you sure he's really blind from birth? And then they come to the man. In verse 24, we're told a second time, they summon the man who had been blind. Give glory to God by telling the truth, they said. We know this man is a sinner. What are they trying to do? They're saying, tell the truth. What's the truth? Our truth. We've just distorted the truth. Say this guy is a sinner, discredit Jesus. You get on board with that, you'll be okay. And when this man refuses to do that, look what they do next. We jump down to verse 34. To this they replied, you were steeped in sin at birth. How dare you lecture us? And they threw him out. What do? They kick him out of the synagogue. He's out of the community. He's outside of the community. He's outside of the fold. And what do? They label him as someone who is evil. They say, you've been evil from birth. That's why you are the way you are. How dare you lecture us? We can't take anything you say seriously. What are they doing? They're shooting the messenger and distorting the truth. They're the choices. The Bible has terms for these: wise, foolish, evil. A wise person says, when I hear the truth, I know what to do with the truth. I let the truth change me. The foolish person says, no, actually, I hear the truth. I don't like the truth. I'm going to try to distort the truth to suit me. That's what the Pharisees are doing. But actually, the Pharisees take it a step further. Then the evil person says, no, actually, I don't like the truth. I'm going to both distort the truth and I'm going to destroy the one who brings the truth. In a work situation, if this was a person that they got fired they got confronted by their boss and told they'd done something wrong, they're more likely to walk out of the place going, I'm going to destroy you and this company on the way out. Right? They're bent on destruction. They're bent on evil. And that's a response to the Pharisees. First they try to distort the truth, and when they can't distort the truth, they say, let's distort the truth, and also let's get rid of the one who brings truth. And what about the man born blind? What does he do? What choice does he make in response to the truth that he's encountered with Jesus? Well, we're told verse 35 to 38. Jesus heard that he'd been thrown out. And when he found them, don't you love that? Jesus hears what he's been through. And he doesn't wait for the man to come and find him. Jesus hears he's been thrown out of the synagogue and he says, I'm going to go find this guy and make sure he's okay. And when he found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? Which is the way that Jesus described himself. Who is he, sir? The man asked. Tell me so that I may believe in him. Jesus said, you have now seen him. In fact, he is the one speaking to you. Then the man said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. This man who's been maligned and mistreated, who's been told he's evil from birth and that nobody should pay any attention to him. Jesus goes and he finds him. And so how is God glorified in this moment, in this story? This man who many felt was cursed by God, this man who seemed he might have felt forgotten by God, now ends up worshipping Jesus. This man who was born blind can now see in every way. He sees physically, but he sees what not even the religious leaders could see. That Jesus is the one. That he was the Son of Man, that he was the King, he was the prophet, he was the Saviour. He was the one who came to rescue them. And he sees what they could not see. And so he ends up saying, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And I reckon that's a wise man. I reckon that's a smart man. That's a man who let the truth change him. Rather than try to change the truth, or rather than destroy the one who brings a message that might be uncomfortable. And so it relieves the question for all of us, what will we do? Next time Jesus invites you to do something, next time you feel a little nudge, a little prompting, and he says, go, and will you go? Will you do what he calls you to do? Will you take the little step? Do you walk to the place called sent? And say, it's a little confusing. I'm not sure why you're doing this. It feels like I'm going further from you than closer to you sometimes, Jesus. But I trust that you're good. And I trust that you know what you're doing. And I'm going to start to walk in the direction that you've called me to walk. What will you do? Let me pray for us. Father, as we get ready to engage into a whole new week, Father, my prayer for everyone here would be in some way we'll hear your voice. That, Father, when you confront us with the truth about ourselves, the truth about you, that, Father, we'll be wise in the way that we respond. We'll allow your truth, your invitation to change us, that when you invite us to walk in a particular way, that we'll trust you, that will move in the direction that you call us, Father. Even when we don't have it all figured out, even when we still have questions, even when we're a little confused at times, that we'll trust that you're good. And we'll trust that you have something good in store for us as we walk the path that you call us to walk. And so, Father, my prayer for everyone here would be our experience this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.